Hey everybody, Howard here with cool chord tricks to learn on guitar. Actually on piano or whatever instrument you might be playing, okay? I actually prefer the term devices, cool chord devices, okay? But this is a really common thing and you will find it in literally hundreds of songs. And the term is secondary dominant chords. Trust me, the name sounds far more serious than it is, all right? It's a songwriting device, so if you like to write songs, this is a really cool thing to know. Or if you just like to put cool chord progressions together to solo over, it's really cool to know as well, okay? And that's another lesson in and of itself. How do you improvise over these kinds of changes, okay? So you'll find this in so many popular songs. The Beatles used it over and over and over again in songs like Yesterday, Oh Darling, Don't Let Me Down, George Harrison's Something, which is an excellent use of secondary dominant chords. So let's dive into it and I'll show you exactly how this works. So I'm going to be doing this in the key of G for no other reason than it's a handy key and it's easy to see visually on camera. And so if we're in the key of G, then we are basing everything off of a G major scale. And the notes in that scale are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then finally G, back to the octave, okay? So in the world of chord scales, for every note in that scale, there's a corresponding chord, okay? And I'm not going to go into the theoretical details of this in this particular lesson because I've done it in my lessons on jazz and so forth. But the first chord would be in the world of sevenths, a G major 7. Then we'd have an A minor 7, a B minor 7, a C major 7, a D dominant 7th, which is what we're working with today, E minor 7, and then an F sharp minor 7 flat 5, or as some players like to call it, a half diminished, okay? So we've got those 7 chords. Now, you can simplify the chords, of course. You can just make it a G, an A minor, a B minor, a C major, and so on. What's important and worthy to understand is that the 5th chord is always a dominant 7th. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the D is a dominant 7th chord, okay? So secondary dominant 7ths are really, really fun. They're really cool and they add a lot to your writing, to your playing, to your improvising, whatever you like to do. So let's say we've got 3 really simple chords, a G, an E minor, and a C major. So we might have something like this. Just a simple chord progression. Now, by adding secondary dominant chords to the progression, we can make the progression longer and create more taste, more diversity in that chord progression. Now I'm going to play it adding secondary dominants. It'll be a familiar sound to your ears because again, it's been used in so many songs. Kind of a recognizable sound, right? Like I said, tons of Beatles songs, tons of other songs, tons of everybody's songs, right? So that's using secondary dominant chords. So I'm going to explain how it works, okay? We started off with 3 simple chords, once again, G, E minor, and C. So how you form a secondary dominant 7th chord is you base it off the chord that you're going to, okay? You can do a big theoretical rundown on this, but this is just the simplest way to view it, okay? So, if I'm moving from G to E minor is the chord I'm concerned with. I want to put a chord between the G chord and that E minor, and that chord is going to be a secondary dominant. Now this is really easy. You're going to an E minor, so you find an E note on the guitar, anywhere you want to find it, 7th fret on the A string, for instance. And what we want to do is we base that secondary dominant chord on a 5th above that chord. So E and then B, okay? So B is the 5th of E, okay? So that means we want to play a B7 chord. Seventh chords are dominant sevenths, right? So we want to play a B7 in between the G and the E minor. So we wind up with it's as simple as that. Just base it off of the fifth of the chord that you're going to. Now the next chord that we went to in this progression was a C, okay? So what is the fifth of C? We find a C note on the guitar. There's the fifth fret on the D string, so that's a G. So after the E minor chord, then we want to play a G dominant seventh as we make our way to the C chord. Right there to the C chord, or any way you want to play it. Now we're going to make our way back to the G, right, to start the progression over again. So we need to find the fifth of G. So we find a G note on the guitar, third fret on the sixth string, and then the fifth is right there. Your fifths are always like that, right? Like power chords. So we want a D7 as we make our way back to the G. So we wind up with that full secondary dominant seventh progression. It sounds really nice, right? And you can add it to any chord progression you have, okay? So let's say instead of moving from G to E minor, I'm going to move from G to B minor, okay? And so on and so forth, right? So when we're moving to that B minor chord now, what we want to do is find the fifth of that B minor chord. So here's a B note, second fret on the A string, fourth fret on the D string. That's an F sharp. So we actually want to put an F sharp dominant seventh in between the G and the B minor. And we wind up with this. And what's interesting is as you move through the secondary dominant chords, placing them at different points in the progression, you get wildly different sounds, really cool different sounds. So here we go, putting that F sharp in between. You might recognize that from Sexy Sadie by the Beatles, for instance. Just a really cool sound, right? And if you go to the C chord after the B minor and we want to make our way back to the G, then we want to put a secondary dominant seventh chord in between the C and the G. And again, that would be a D7, okay? That's the fifth of G, the chord we're heading to. Very, very cool stuff to explore. Now let's go back to that first progression where we had G major, E minor, and C. And by using secondary dominant chords combined with inversions of those chords, the various chords that we're playing, we can really get some great sounds. So backtracking just a second, we've got G major to B dominant seventh, that's the secondary dominant, then E minor to G dominant seventh, that's the secondary dominant seventh, and then C, D dominant seventh, back to G. Okay, now by using inversions, for instance, starting a G like this, moving to an inverted B dominant seventh, E minor, inverted G dominant seventh, then C, D7, G. So we get some pretty cool sounds. sweet. You get that descending line. Sounds a little bit like Elton John, doesn't it? Okay. And then you can use different inversions to do the same thing. I'm using the same chords, G, B dominant 7th, E minor, etc. Same chords, different inversions, all using secondary dominant 7th chords. Now, once again, just to wrap up the lesson, let's briefly talk about exactly how it's done, okay? So we had that G, and we're moving to E minor. So we want to find a secondary dominant chord between those two chords, and we want to base it off of the chord we're going to. So we want to look at that E minor, and we want to find out what the fifth is above that, E, B. These are always fifth shapes on your guitar, your fretboard, so it's very easy to figure out. So we want a B7 chord. So now we got a G, B7, E minor, and we're going to a C. So what is the fifth of C? It's G. So we want a G dominant 7th chord. Now we're going to make our way back to the G, so we want to find the fifth of G, which is D. And that gives us a D7, okay? That is exactly how it's done all day long, and like I said, it's in hundreds, if not thousands of songs. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. There's a brief lesson on secondary dominant 7th chords, what they are, how to find them, how to use them, keeping the theory down to a roar, okay? I hope you enjoyed it, and I shall see you guys in the next video.